So I want to start today by talking about my weekend. It's been a long, tiring weekend, but a lot of really interesting things, and kind of take the take the video from there. So yesterday, I went out canvassing for a local Green Party candidate, Joshua Harris, as part of DSA. We endorsed the candidate. So yesterday was the first time we went out to canvass and do what we can do to help him get elected. He's running for a local state delegate race here. And what we did was just went in the morning, got trained, and then went out a couple hours, and we're going to be doing that from time to time. But it just brought to mind some things I've been talking about, and also some other things. It's great to do videos. It's great to go on Twitter and spout off. I think it actually does have value, personally, and for me, it's also quite therapeutic in these times. But what I found is that you can only do so much doing that. And same with voting. Voting is critical, but you can only do so much. You hit a point where you have to get up and get out and get your hands dirty and go actually do concrete things, organize, activate, so to speak. And this is very important, and people should not forget that. They shouldn't forget that, as part of having a vibrant democracy is being active and letting it be known that if the politicians aren't doing a good job, let them be, whether they're Democrat or Republican, they got to go. Because we got to be honest, Democrats and Republicans, while they are not the same, no doubt, Republicans are much worse. Democrats still are part of the overlying corrupt system. And you take an example like here in Baltimore and other cities, you'll have one party politics with only Democrats, and things are very poorly run because you have rampant corruption. You have people who run under a Democratic name, but in fact, they are serving to help the ruling class, the capitalist class, if you will. So we have to oppose them. And in this case, obviously, when you're supporting a Green Party candidate or a third party candidate, there's always some level of apprehension. You go talk to people, but about we don't want to end up helping a Republican win, and that's a very valid. Some people will not like that because they'll say, it doesn't matter if you're supporting two parties that are inherently part of the ruling class, and I understand that, and I agree with that. Conceptually, 110%, but you can't blame people for being concerned when you see Republicans are doing a lot of really bad things. So it's almost an element of harm reduction. So we don't want the Republican to win, so we're going to pick the Democrat, even if the Democrat is like Andrew Cuomo, still somebody who will mostly advocate for the ruling elites. But at least they won't do as bad as Republicans, so we got to vote for them. So I totally understand that line of thinking. In this case, it's beautiful because there are 3 Democrats running and 1 Green. So you don't have to worry about a Republican. And what I'm getting at here is places like districts like this where you don't have that Republican threat, so to speak, maybe are a good place to start. These are also typically districts loaded with a lot of working class folk, be they white or minority. They tend to be more working class. But if you've ever been in Baltimore, Baltimore is a very interesting city. I've grown to really love the city after living here for so many years, because it's a very unique mixed city. But at the same time, while that's a case, um, it's not well run. And it's been run by Democrats. And it's not because they're Democrats that it's not well run. It's not well run because there's just a lot of people who are not doing, going out there to help the working class. They may say they're going to support a living wage, but then they'll back out on it and they'll pull back. They'll be more interested in the business community than they will about the working men and women. So it's a place where you can see. And in my discussions, I don't want, without getting in detail, because I don't want to the stuff I don't want to broadcast out there, because it's not, these are face-to-face conversations, but an overall gist is people may not be very comfortable if it's a Republican versus a Democrat, and then you have a more left-wing candidate. But in this case, you have a couple of Democrats, one in particular who's a very bad Democrat. This guy just, he's, his father was, a well-known politician, so he's a nepotism kid. So it's in a very ideal place you can vote for a third-party candidate, and you don't have to worry about potential harm coming in, because we cannot forget. I mean, again, in concept, in theory, it's good to say, don't vote for the Republican. I mean, don't never vote for the Republican. Don't vote for the Democrat. But it's tough when there is a risk that a Republican can win. And even I had that problem in 2016. I know Hillary Clinton wasn't a good candidate. I know she was running a shitty campaign, and I know that she was basically part of the American aristocracy. But I didn't want Trump to win because I knew what Trump could do to the most vulnerable people in society. I knew what he could do, and so being a voter, a registered voter in Pennsylvania, I knew he could win that state, which ultimately did. I mean, take a drive through the middle of the state, and you could have seen it was a very distinct possibility. So I voted for Hillary Clinton. It was not out of happiness, not out of joy. I'm sad I had to, but it was just the reality of the situation. Because I knew Trump would create such an extreme harm on those people. And unfortunately, it's come to pass. But what we got to take out of this is to activate. Because there's a lot more of working and students and women and people who are struggling. There's a lot more of us than there is of them. There's actually a comrade at the meeting tell me, he said, there's 4 million teachers. They're, alone. And what happened in West Virginia? What happened in Oklahoma? What happened in these states? Ruby red states, run by Republican top to bottom. And by the way, I talked earlier about one party Democratic rule being bad for people. Look at Kansas, look at Oklahoma. One party Republican rule ain't no picnic either. With the vicious amount of cuts they do for things like education and healthcare and welfare programs like food stamps, while at the same time just passing out donations, basically passing out money like candy to the rich and the powerful. Kansas had to cut, parts of Kansas had to cut down to 4-day-a-week schools. Even the moderate Republicans were at the point where like, fuck this is too much. We've tried radical right-wing conservatism. We've tried radical neoliberalism. All right, and that's what conservative Republican is. It's radical neoliberalism. So it doesn't work. There's a theory that cutting taxes creates revenue. It's all bullshit. So what I'm getting at, though, is, sorry, I got on a little an angle there. But the point is, so there's a real concern and harm in, creating harm. It's easy to say I'm going to vote for a third party, but if there's a risk of a Donald Trump winning, then you got to reconsider, because, and that's where I was in 2016. I have family members. I mean, I was born in the U.S., but I have family members who come from countries that fell on the Muslim ban list. They couldn't go visit they couldn't bring a family member over. I mean, hell, I only got to see my aunt because there was a stay in that fucking Muslim ban. And now it's back. So luckily I was one of the lucky ones. I got to see my aunt. A lot of people can't. So that's a real tangible harm. You look at what the type of things they did in the tax cut, the type of things they're doing regulatory work and environmental and work standards and all these things. This is real tangible harm, and it's extreme harm. So understanding all that, here is a place where we don't have to worry about that. It's only Democrats. So you see a more of comfort. Okay, we can take a shot, vote for a Green. We can vote for an independent. This is something, and it's something if the left can unify and you pull together a large swath of working people in these districts, that can be a starting point. And you saw that with Ocasio-Cortez in New York 14. You saw it with Salazar also up there, a state level race. So I'm not saying all the candidates are perfect, and certainly the electoral process as it is now is far from democratic, and it's not going to solve all the problems. But if the left can unify behind candidates, kind of a leftward coalition. So, which brings me to the second thing. I went today to a discussion panel on the left and socialism, and we had there were people there from DSA, from Speak Out, which is a socialist organization, from the Green Party, and as also from the Ujima People's Progress Party. Sorry, I'm really bad with names, but and this was a black socialist kind of worker empowered independent organization. And the views, you get a wide range of views. It's a big tent, many different views coming from many different angles. But there's a lot more that unifies those on the left. And it comes down to helping the working man, helping the working woman, helping the people who are in trouble, and reaching really what is the ruling class's buffer. It's having a middle class just big enough. Well, that middle class is starting to fall, all right? It's still there, no doubt about it. But if you can get into that, combine a coalition of some middle class, and even some wealthier people will come aboard. But it'll be primarily the working class, and there's a lot of working class out there. It can work. So hopefully, I hope in the coming years, something caught my eye. Hopefully in the coming years, we will have see some unification, some coalition building on the left to get candidates. Now, once you get those candidates, if you win or you lose, both can win or get big numbers, and we've seen some of that in certain areas. And there are, like I said, districts where you don't have to worry about a Republican. Or maybe there's no presence of Democrats, so the Republican would almost always win anyway, so you can take a shot at it. These aren't competitive districts. These are good places to start. You won't have to worry about the issue of harm reduction. But once you get that candidate, of course, if that candidate wins, they're going to be subjected to a lot of pressure. And whether you're doing inside the Democratic Party or outside of the Democratic Party, because you could run hard left candidates within the Democratic Party, you could go into try to take over the infrastructure. There's going to be a lot of pressure. There's something I was mentioned. There's going to be a heavy amount of pressure put on that candidate to, modulate their message. And we've seen a little bit of that with Gillum in Florida and Ocasio-Cortez. Now, right now, I'm not terribly interested in attacking them. I did give some crap. I was critical of Gillum with particular focus on the issue of foreign policy and some of his tweets about encouraging sanctions on Venezuela. I didn't really care for that kind of talk. But I also couched that by saying, I hope he wins by 30 points because the guy he's running against is a flat out racist. The guy is a flat out Klansman. All right, Ron DeSantis is a flat out Klansman. Quote me on that. So I hope he wins. Now, having said that, first day that these guys get into office, be it AOC or anybody else, we got to be on them. We got to be constantly getting out there. So even a unified left candidate, let's say they win mayor, let's say they win a state delegate race, we got to be on them because the pressures from the establishment, the pressures from the machine are going to be really hard on them because there's an expectation. In many of these Democratic states, just like in Republican states, you have them. You have party bosses. You have county bosses. You have people, really corrupt, mobster-like politicians, and they're going to want to see a left-wing agenda stopped because they have big donors. They have people they got to make happy. Doesn't matter if they have an R or a D next to their name in that case. But up to my feeling is up to the election. Obviously, for harm reduction purposes, I want to see the Democrats win and fight hard for them. Unless it's a district like the one I canvassed in, where you don't have to worry about Republican. Then you can have an honest to God fight and sit out for ideas and say, yeah, we got a Democrat, but let's even do better. And in this case, we don't have to worry about it. Just like with AOC. Again, they don't have to worry about really. They have a Republican running, but it's a nominal Republican. So heavily Democratic district. So why are we even worried about putting a centrist? We should go harder to the left. So getting a little bit bogged down in process. But all that aside, no matter what candidate wins, we have to realize that the electoral process in the current state is not going to do anything. Let me rephrase that. It will do some things, but it's not going to solve all or even most of the problems. Because big money is flowing in, and the people in charge are still going to find ways to pull off their fuckery. There'll be a challenge. It's going to be tough for those elected. They're going to have a real clean conscience. And they're going to have to really be up against it. And every time they run again, if they are true to their word, it's going to be a challenge. But the more of these guys we get in there, the better policies we can get in for working people. And hopefully it'll start to break down that wall. Now, at the same time, that I would also hope that will encourage what really is the answer to solving these ills. Mass movement, labor, social justice, civil rights organizations, on the left, not establishment, on the left, groups against the imperialism, militarism, colonialism perpetuated by the United States of America. We will have to use that electoral as a temporary solution to build a more fair, a more truly democratic society. It's not to say I'm advocating for purely getting rid of the electoral system. I'm only speaking for myself as an individual. To be clear, I'm not speaking for any organizations. I am in no place to do such a thing. These videos are only my own personal opinion. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm only saying that we use the electoral to do what it can to solve some of the problems in the short term, to harm reduce, so to speak. But then, in a perfect world, tomorrow we could wake up and have a general strike, and we would solve a lot of problems that way by mass popular movement. Peaceful, granted, mostly peaceful, mass popular movement. The reason I say mostly peaceful is who knows what, if you challenge you challenge the institutions to be, how they'll react. So certainly not offensive violence. If you have to defend yourself, that's a different story. But the idea would be, look at what happened in West Virginia. Ruby red state, run by Republicans top to bottom. And the teachers said, no, we're done with this. They even went against their own union leaders. The union leaders wanted to capitulate. They said, no, you're screwing us on our health care. You're screwing us with teacher pay. We're working a teaching job, but we also have to work one or two or three other jobs, and we're barely making enough to live. This is not right. And they rose up, and against the law, they fought. They weren't allowed to do that technically, and they did it anyways, and they won concessions from the Republican legislature, from the Republican governor. They won concessions because that's what scares the politicians. Popular movement. That's what makes them move the most. Look what happened to Jeff Flake. He took so much pressure, and granted, the Senate Democrats, I'm sure, were giving him pressure, but he was approached. You could see it in his face when he was approached by those two women, those two courageous women in that elevator in the Capitol, and they told him. You could see it in his face how troubled he was. Because when you get face to face with this shit, human emotions take over. Even if you're a coward, even if you're a piece of shit, it's hard to face it. And it becomes very, very hard to take. So if tomorrow we could wake up and everyone would go out and do this, I would be 100%. I'd say, all right, let's do that. That's faster, be effective. Unfortunately, it's just not there right now. Unfortunately, when you have the major the major mass media entities and the like, run by people who that's their number one goal is to not let that happen. It's tough, it's going to take time, and part of that will be breaking through some of the electoral barriers, and that will allow also when we go out and canvass for elections, that's going to give us practice. We keep going out there. We're going to go from being novices to be hardened activists, hardened campaigners, and that can be transferred into a way, not only in electoral, but in social movements, in issue-oriented campaigns, in strikes, labor action, in protests against police brutality, mass incarceration, and institutional racism. All these things can be done this way. So that's where I fall really with I just had a lot of thoughts after hearing a lot of different things. Myself, I've been conflicted on a lot of these things, but that's where I'm at. It's become a very difficult issue, and I see some people on the left, I don't like it, only criticizing Democrats, the Jimmy Dores and the like. And I don't really appreciate that kind of thing because you're almost neglecting what Republicans have to say. And even that kind of stuff is not helpful. Now, you want to criticize Democrats, be my guest, by all means. But it's kind of a short-term and a long-term strategy. Obviously, long-term, Democrats aren't going to, the current incarnation of Democrats are not going to get the job done, and most likely even within the Democratic Party it's not going to work because it's a vassal of the capitalist state. It's a vassal of the ruling elite, so it's going to be hard to really do much, but we have to take the short term and do what we can to minimize the damage, minimize the pain inflicted on those most vulnerable members of society, and keep fighting for them, while at the same time there's a long-term plan to grow our numbers, to become better, to become more experienced activists, and eventually push through. But again, I keep going back to the teacher strikes. I mean, you saw what happened. Imagine if tomorrow every teacher says, we're done, we're not teaching anymore. Until we get until no teacher has to deal with having to work another job just to get by and make ends meet. We need teachers. They could drop everything and do it. It kind of goes against, we've all become very pacified and comfortable in that regard, but that's what's ultimately that sort of popular movement is going to be what it takes. But again, also, at the same time, we got an election coming up, gotta try to get the best people in there at the same time too. So, but this is really, I love talking about it. I could go on for hours. This is critical, important stuff. And as I even learn and evolve, I will continue to talk about it. But absolutely, that's one thing. And I hope on the left we also gotta remember what is the most important thing. Theory and everything is critical. Knowing what you stand for is critical. But the ultimate thing right now is doing whatever we can do to help the working, to help the poor, to help the struggling, to help the persecuted, and do whatever we can to help them. And this has got to cross racial lines, gender lines, and be a coalition. All right, until one group alone cannot do it, just can't. So one thing I'm going to be resolving to do is, opening my ears to different experiences, different groups, going to different events, and always having an open mind. So I hope all of you can as well. But have a good rest of the Sunday night, and until next time, so long.